Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, gang. So we are going to get back to where we were talking about. We were talking about the Haymarket Massacre, and then we're going to talk a little, or I did talk about that, and now we're going to talk about some of the other anarchist responses. So we're going to go back to there we are. Woohoo! This is the same PowerPoint from the previous video. There we are. And so now we're going to look at other anarchist responses. This is going to be sort of a shortened video. So it's still kind of part of the previous one, but not really. So we're going to look at some of the other anarchist responses. We're going to look at Alexander Berkman and Henry Clay Frick, who we met when we were talking about robber barons and Homestead. We're going to look at Leon Czolgosz and President McKinley in 1901. Then we're going to look at a wave of bombings known as the Galleanist bombings throughout the United States. So let's look at Monsieur Clay and Monsieur Frick. I just realized I took Henry Clay Frick's name and just went Monsieur. Let's look at Alexander Berkman, there we go, and Henry Clay Frick. This attempted assassination will take place in 1892. And in response to the Homestead strike, in response to Frick's actions with respect to Homestead, bringing in the strike breakers, bringing in the Pinkertons, bringing in the power of the state against the strikers at Homestead, Alexander Berkman and his lover, Emma Goldman, decided to assassinate Henry Clay Frick, the man in charge of Carnegie Steel, and who they blamed for everything in the Homestead strike. Now, the idea was that Berkman would kill Frick and then kill himself, while Goldman would be around to explain the events, to give the story that matters. And they both believed the assassination would arouse the working class into rising up and revolting against the capitalist system. Now, initially, Berkman wanted to send a mail bomb to Frick. M-A-I-L says, put together a bomb, send it in the mail. Wanted to mail a bomb to Frick, but he had issues making the bomb. He was going red wire, green wire, red wire, green wire. Couldn't figure it out, so he decided, screw it, I'm just going to confront Frick face to face. So Berkman drove to Pittsburgh, where Frick was located, bought a brand new stylish suit, bought a gun, and went to Frick's office. And so he went to the office, and the secretary said, wait, you don't have an appointment. Frick just sort of brushed them off and barged into the office, where Berkman shot Frick 3 times before the gun jammed, and then pulled out a knife and stabbed him in the leg before being subdued by some nearby workers. Some nearby workers, members of the working class who Berkman was trying to get them to rise up, subdued him and knocked him unconscious. Frick would survive the assassination attempt. Berkman would be sent to jail for the attempted assassination. Goldman would not, she would be tied to it, but she would not be convicted. Should not be arrested. In essence, basically what ends up happening, Berkman says, hey baby, will you wait for me? Emma says, yeah honey, I'll wait for you. Waited for him. They got out. They continued on with their push towards anarchism. Of course, after Berkman gets out, he doesn't go and attack anybody else. He works with Mother Earth, with Emma Goldman, and will be deported along with Goldman in 1919. Berkman will end up serving 14 years for attempted murder. And unfortunately for Berkman, unfortunately for Goldman, the attempted assassination did not have the desired effect, as industry condemned the attack. Labor condemned the attack. And even their fellow anarchists condemned their attack. So Berkman went out, tried killing Frick, hopefully to get the working class to rise up against the capitalists. One that was a little more successful was Leon Czolgosz's, I'll move this here, there we go, Leon Czolgosz's assassination of President William Mackenzie, occurring on 6 September 1901. So Czolgosz was born to Polish immigrants in Detroit. So even though he has a weird-looking name, Czolgosz was a native-born American. He was a native-born American who turned to anarchism after losing his job in the Panic of 1893. Czolgosz worked, after he lost his job, he worked a number of odd jobs throughout the rest of the decade before being influenced by the murder of Umberto I of Italy, the King of Italy, by an anarchist in 1900. Because McKinley, like the rulers in Europe, was viewed by anarchists, was viewed by Czolgosz in particular, as a symbol of oppression. And so the idea was, if we remove the symbol of oppression, things will get better for the working class. Now, McKinley himself had decided to go speak in Buffalo, New York. In Buffalo, New York, you had the Pan-American Exposition occurring. And McKinley wanted to go give a speech at the exposition, and then take his family to see the different pavilions. And so while he was shaking hands with well-wishers at the Temple of Music Pavilion, McKinley was approached by Czolgosz, who pulled out a gun and shot the president twice in the midsection. The president the president was shot. The crowd immediately tackled Czolgosz. And it was only McKinley's admonition, only McKinley telling the crowd not to kill Czolgosz, let him see justice, that prevented Czolgosz from being lynched by the crowd. You might be wondering, well, Mark, what about Secret Service? Well, Secret Service wasn't really in the business of protecting the president until after this. Who knew the assassination of a president would kind of get things going in that direction? McKinley was immediately operated on, and attempts were made to repair the damage that the bullets caused. Now, it was the inability of the surgeons to find one of the bullets, assumed to be lodged in the president's back, that would eventually cause McKinley's death. As the wound became gangrenous, gangrene, not a good way to go, causing a fatal infection that took the president's life on the 14th of September, 1901. So shot on the 6th of September, dies on the 14th. So 8 days of probably some excruciating pain. Now, pardon me. Now, similar to the aftermath of Berkman's attempted assassination of Frick in 1892, the assassination was condemned in most corners. There were some anarchists who celebrated the assassination, but interestingly enough, the blame was still placed on foreigners, even though Czolgosz was a native-born American. And it was blamed on anarchism because when the police checked out Czolgosz's apartment, they found several dozen copies of Mother Earth, Emma Goldman's anarchist journal, and said, aha, assassin, anarchism, must be the same thing. So we have attempts at taking out people in positions of power to try to change things for the better. We also have what was known as the Galleanist bombings, named after this gentleman here, Luigi Galleani. And Galleani was an Italian immigrant to the US who became the foremost advocate for direct action and propaganda by the deed, particularly amongst the Italian American community. Similar to most and the German community, Galleani was an impressive orator, and he was a writer who gained many adherents, many followers throughout the Italian American community. And so, in addition to traveling throughout the country and giving speeches, Galleani published. Whoop! I meant to move me. There we go. I moved me. There we go. I'm going to move me down here. There we are. In addition to traveling throughout the country and giving speeches, Galleani also published the Cronaca Sovversa, the Subversive Chronicle. It was an anarchist newspaper delivered throughout the immigrant Italian communities in many urban areas. Galleani's supporters, who called themselves Galleanists, essentially went on a campaign of violence throughout the 1910s. You're going to have several bombings in New York, Chicago, Boston. And, I mean, it wasn't just bombings. I mean, you have one particular Galleanist. He worked as a chef, attempted to poison 100 guests at a banquet using arsenic. So they tended to focus not just on let's blow things up, but also trying to attack other members of the working class. And so just to get back, I'm going to mention four bombings or attempted bombings. We're going to have the Lexington Avenue bombing in 1914, the Preparedness Day bombing in 1916, the Milwaukee bombing in 1917, and we're going to end with the Wall Street bombing of 1920. Now, first and foremost, we have the Lexington bombing, seen here on my left, your right, taking place on the 4th of July, 1914. This is the Lexington Avenue bombing. And so throughout June and July of 1914, 4 anarchists were working on gathering dynamite to put together and plant a bomb at the home of industrialist John D. Rockefeller, the man in control of Standard Oil. And they were putting it together to basically bomb his home in Tarrytown, New York. Now, unfortunately for the bomb makers, and fortunately for Rockefeller, these anarchists were not so good at their craft, and an explosion will rock their tenement building in Harlem, New York at 9 a.m. on the 4th of July, 1914. Happy Independence Day. The anarchists were in some cases literally blown to pieces by their own bombing. You can see the picture here where the top 3 floors of the 5-story building were just destroyed. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. 2 years later, on the 22nd of July, 1916, we have what's known as the Preparedness Day bombing. And here I have a picture of a parade in San Francisco. Because San Francisco was a hotbed of radicalism and a hotbed for the labor movement in the first decades of the 20th century. And Galleanists were known to be in the area. Indeed, in July 1916, unsigned pamphlets were passed throughout the city, talking about the use of, quote, a little direct action on the 22nd. to show that militarism cannot be forced on us and our children without violent protest. And why the 22nd? Well, this is July 1916. The Great War, World War I, had been going on for 2 years by this point, and the election was gearing up, and Woodrow Wilson was campaigning on the slogan of "He kept us out of the war." But at the same time that this was happening, he was trying to make sure that the United States was prepared in case anything happened. And San Francisco said, yes, we will show our support. And so on the 22nd of July, the city of San Francisco planned a Preparedness Day parade to show support for American involvement in the war in Europe. The parade would be the largest ever held in San Francisco, with 51,329 marchers, 52 bands, and thousands of floats. So literally almost 52,000 people were planning on marching in this parade. Huge parade. Now, tell me if this doesn't sound familiar to, say, I don't know, the Boston Marathon. About a half hour into the planned 3.5-hour parade, a pipe bomb exploded, killing 10 bystanders, and wounding another 40, including, tragically, a young girl who had her legs blown off. Needless to say, the parade was stopped, and the wounded and the killed were tended to. The next year, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the 24th of November, 1917, a plain brown package was discovered at a church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, by a social worker who just happened to be passing by. And the social worker knocked on the church door, and a janitor happened to be around and said, hey, there's this brown box. And so they went, brought it in, opened the package, and went, oh no. And so the janitor immediately notified the police and brought it to the central police station. Now the police put the bomb in their central police station. They were getting ready to inspect the bomb, to go, okay, how do we take this apart? When it exploded, killing 9 members of the Milwaukee Police Department. Now, Mario Buddha, who we will see in a second, one of the top bomb makers for the Galleanists, was suspected of constructing this bomb, but there was no direct evidence linking him to the bombing. Buddha, one of the top bomb makers for the Galleanists, was suspected about constructing this bomb, but there was no evidence linking him to the bombing. Now let's talk about the big one, my friends. The Wall Street bombing, 16 September 1920. So with the other bombings, you can sort of see how they're progressing. Lexington, their target is John D. Rockefeller, an industrialist. Preparedness Day bombing. Anarchists believed that the state was using their power to force people against their will with the draft to go to war. Milwaukee, it's a little more tenuous, but the idea was this church was involved with, it's a little more tenuous. But the big one is the Wall Street bombing, the bombing of the economic heart of the United States, 16 September 1920. And around noon on September 16th, 1920, a horse-drawn wagon packed with over 100 pounds of dynamite was parked across the street from the headquarters of the J.P. Morgan Bank in New York City. So the American anarchists focused on economic targets. 100 pounds of dynamite packed in a horse-drawn carriage, augmented by 500 pounds of cast iron. So surrounded by 500 pounds of cast iron to ensure that metal shrapnel will just fly everywhere. I mean, you could almost think of it as an early form of a car bomb. There were 38 victims of this bombing. Well, 39 if you count the horse, with another 143 people injured. The blast caused over $2 million in damage to the Wall Street financial district. That's about $23 million in 2012 dollars. And here we have a picture of the aftermath of the Wall Street bombing. Now, the initial investigation of the blast by the New York City Police, NYPD, the New York City Police, and the Bureau of Investigation. Now, it wouldn't officially become the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the FBI until the 1930s, but the NYPD and the Bureau of Investigation focused on the possibility of the incident being a horrible accident. At the same time, the board of directors of the New York Stock Exchange came together and had to figure out what to do. Should we stay closed or should we open up? And the decision was made to open the financial district for business the next day. We got to keep making money. We can't have people be scared and not invest. And so they ordered the area to be cleaned to allow for normal business to proceed the next day. Now, those of you who are criminologists or in criminal justice as a major, or even if you've watched any police drama on TV ever, you might be going, oh God, they're clearing away all the evidence. And indeed, by cleaning the area, this also helped clean away a lot of the physical evidence from the bombing that may have helped the investigators. By the next day, by the 17th of September, the Bureau of Investigation located and released to the public a number of flyers claiming responsibility for the bombings. The flyers contained the message, remember, we will not tolerate any longer. Free the political prisoners, or it will be sure death for all of you. Now, the political prisoners at this time were two Italian anarchists. The ties to one to anarchy very strong, the ties for the other not so much, named Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco, Vanzetti, Vanzetti. And before the bombing, they had been captured and convicted of armed robbery. And they were being held primarily, it was believed, on the basis of Sacco's anarchist beliefs. And so many were going, look, these are just political prisoners. These are the charges these are phony charges. And so those were the, quote, political prisoners. Over the next 3 years, investigations will focus on radical, socialist, and communist organizations, but the Bureau of Investigation never found enough evidence for indictments. The bombing, this is basically an aerial view of Wall Street in the aftermath, as after things have been removed a bit. But the Wall Street bombing will eventually be tied to this gentleman here. Hi guys, Mario Buda, B-U-D-A, a Galleanist. As I mentioned, Buda was the chief bomb maker for the Galleanists. The Milwaukee bombing was also likely his handiwork. Buda was born in Italy, and he came to the United States in the first decade of the 20th century as part of that wave of immigration between 1880 and 1920. Buddha was already familiar with some of the anarchist ideology and also familiar with rudimentary bomb making when he hooked up with Galleani and his group. It was proven, it was shown that Buddha was in New York on the day that the bomb exploded and had left the US to return to Naples shortly thereafter. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's kind of circumstantial evidence. Where's the connection mark? Well, 35 years after the bombing, so 1955, Buddha admitted his involvement to the bombing in interviews with his nephew, who was interviewing him for a class project of all things, as well as an old anarchist associate. Buddha basically said, yeah, I did it. Statute of limitations had kind of already gone by. But up until the September 11 attacks in 2001, the Wall Street bombing will be the deadliest act of terrorism on American soil. Deadlier than the Preparedness Day bombing in 1916, deadlier than Boston in the 20-teens. So that is other anarchist responses to trying to change the system. Again, for the most part, outside of maybe Solgosh, most of the anarchist responses for the United States, for the American anarchists, are targeting economic. They're targeting economic targets, whether it's Henry Clay Frick, whether it's John D. Rockefeller, whether it's Wall Street itself. But as we're going to see, stop sharing. As we're going to see in the next video, this is going to be quite different from Europe. All right, so we're going to look at Europe in the next video. I'm going to stop here. Have a great day, guys. Go forth, slay dragons, and I'll see you in the next video.